Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. Today we have El Señor Doctor, Economist, and Professor Richard Wolff. But before, let me salute my dear brothers and sisters. Squido says, Hola, Egberto, ¿cómo estás? Sarah Brishes, hello. Beat Jeep, I'm going to have to learn how to say that name correctly. E2247 says, hello, relatives. Today is going to be will be greatest ever visit for sure. That's why I so love E2247, because every day is even greater. It's a good thing we're moving forward because there's no end in moving forward. Yvette Avery Herod, our labor activist, the woman that's making a change. And AVQ is back, he says, watching from Twitch. And he says, I've been mostly away for the last week, spending time with friends and families during good weather days. Egberto, today's just one long one that I'd love for you to read out in full, to which I will oblige. Michael says, Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller open letter to Governor Abbott. On behalf of the people of Texas and the United States, I call on you to immediately halt your policy of conducting safety inspections on commercial vehicles entering Texas from Mexico using Texas Department of Public Safety troopers. Stop. That is a Republican to a Republican war in the midst. Who knows? This misguided policy will have little or no impact on the invasion on our southern border caused by the inaction of the Biden administration. Instead, the policy will hurt Texas and American consumers by driving up already skyrocketing food prices. Stop. So here we have a Republican immediately accusing another Republican of causing inflation. This should be all over the news. Worsening ongoing supply chain disruptions, causing massive product shortages, and sadly, Texas and American companies with untold losses. Remember this, folks. Remember this. Remember this. We've always talked about the supply chain being a private sector problem. It was something caused by the private sector, but we digress. A public sector, in this case, the governor of Texas single-handedly and with the support of a lot of his party, created a supply chain problem. If this policy continues within the next week, I predict that Texas consumers will be paying $2 for a lime and $5 for an avocado. The following week, the Texas produce shelves will be empty for the third time because of policies implemented by your administration. Again, this is a Republican scolding a Republican. The Agriculture Commissioner scolding the governor. Your inspection protocol, he's trying to save his butt. That's what he's doing. Your inspection protocol is not stopping legal immigration. It's not stopping food it is stopping food from getting to grocery store shelves, and in many cases causing food to rot in trucks, many of which are owned by Texas and other American companies. It is simply political theater. Wow. The people of Texas deserve better. The president's failed border policy does not need to be enhanced by a state policy that does little or nothing to impact illegal immigration. Officials with the United States Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection already conduct extensive inspections of commercial vehicles entering the United States at Texas border crossings. Resources should be placed where illegal crossings take place, not to create a crisis where they do not. Every hour this policy remains in place costs consumers more money, creates huge economic losses for Texas companies, and will most certainly lead to empty grocery store shelves. This misguided policy is also stopping businesses trying to export into Mexico, our largest trading partner, because of the stoppage of traffic both north and south. There are already reports of more than 20,000 commercial trucks backed up on the border, many of them refrigerated and carrying fragile produce that will soon be ruined. You know, we always knew that Greg Abbott didn't have a lot upstairs. But my God, doesn't he know that you can mess with people's ideologies and all of that, but don't mess with the plutocracy's dollars. You start messing with their money, they throw everything out the door. Remember that, folk. Remember that. Remember that. Welcome aboard, Melanie Keelan from El País de España, from Spain, Barcelona. Alistair Waters, welcome to Politics and Right. And Daniel Ledo, I'm back. Thank you for all the cards and flowers. I missed you, brother. Where have you been? You know, I was about to, said when I get back to Houston, I'm going to have to go search for him because we can't have Brother Ledo missing. Bruce, BP Alpha, love and peace to all. Ain't gonna study war no more. I love the feeling. I love the thought. And of course, there's Eric Hayes that says, Egberto, can you predict things who else in Washington doesn't have all upstairs? No, quite a few. Quite a few don't have all upstairs. But I know you'd like me to talk about the caricature many on the right would like to make of Brother Biden. Brother Biden may be a stammerer. He may be a stutterer. But he's got a lot upstairs. And he got a lot of knowledge upstairs. I tell you something, I don't agree with him on his policies. I was with him, though, for Build Back Better, where he decided to go fairly progressive in nature. I was with him. But other than that, no senor, no senor. Anyhow, you know what? Let's see if I don't need to salute anybody because it's a fairly long interview. I want to go right into brother and Dr. Economist, Professor Richard Wolff. So folks, enjoy. This will be very, very enlightening. Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we are honored once again to be in the presence of Dr. Richard D. Wolff. He's a professor of economics, Emeritus, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The Sickness is the System. Don't we know it? When capitalism fails to save us from pandemics or itself, and is available along with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Dr. Wolff, it's my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right once again.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here.
Let me start real simple, sir. I want to tell our audience, first of all, that I became aware of you after you did a symposium called Capitalism Hits the Fan. And this former pure capitalist was forever transformed after seeing that piece, and it changed my life entirely into one who believed in humanity at that point. So my question to you, sir, first of all, is what is wrong with our economy right now?
Well, a little bit depends on what you call our economy. If you mean the United States, the capitalist system here, let me talk a little bit about what's wrong with that. But I need a preface. Every economic system in the history of the world shows the following pattern. It's born out of another different system. It changes and grows over time. And then it eventually passes away and gives way to another system that is born and then goes through the same stages. That's true of old ancient village economies, of tribal economies, of slave economic systems, of feudalism. It's true of them all. And what that means is that the system we're living under now capitalism is about going to show us pretty much the same pattern. There's no reason to assume it would be otherwise. And we know capitalism was born. We kind of date that to the 17th, 18th century in Britain and Europe. We know it has evolved over the last 3 or 4 centuries to become the global system it is today. But I'm afraid the inference is the next stage is it's over. And it really isn't a question of whether, it's only a question of when. And I think if with that background, let me take a couple of minutes and tell you where I think the United States was and is. First of all, let's all remember that the Europeans originally came here and destroyed the existing population. Not 100%, but almost, okay? And they came here and they fought with the native population, they fought with one another, and when the dust cleared, we were a colony of Great Britain. And we became a colony, and we stayed a colony for a century or more. Now, in the late 18th century, there developed an economy here that was, to make a long story short, sick and tired of being told what to do and how to do it and when to do it by some king thousands of miles away in Britain. So we had a revolutionary war and we became independent. At that time, we were a small secondary part of the big dominant capitalist empire of the world, the British Empire. Mm-hmm. But now let's be honest. Over the last century and a half, roughly from the time of our revolution, our, by the way, bloody, violent separation from the British King George III, a reversal took place. The new capitalism of the United States grew and displaced the old capitalism of Britain. The British Empire doesn't exist anymore. It was replaced by the American Empire. There were others who challenged the British Empire, the Germans, for example, the Japanese, but there were 2 world wars in which these capitalist empires fought each other, and they destroyed each other with one exception. Britain's empire was destroyed, the German empire was destroyed, the Japanese empire was destroyed. We were the ones left standing here in the US. So after 1945, with the destruction of everybody else, we emerged as the American capitalist economy. And look, over the last century, it's been a nice ride for us in America. Not for all of us, obviously.
I was about to say that, yeah.
Yeah, not for all of us, but for the majority, and particularly for the white majority, it was a nice uphill ride. But look, if you remember the history I started out with, everybody had to have known that, like every other system and like every other empire, you're born, you evolve, and then you get displaced. So let me say where we are now. And I'm not saying anything that most Americans, if they don't know it, they kind of smell it.
They can infer it, yeah.
Yeah, we're done. We are on the down, and the down is not very much fun. Way less fun than on the ride up, you know? And we have a new empire. It's called China. And they are replacing us. They, in large parts, they already have. The war in Ukraine is a footnote to a shift from the dominance of an American capitalism emerging out of Europe, and it's shifting over to a new dynamic core of capitalism that is in places like China and India and Brazil and South Africa and those parts of the world that were colonial, that were suppressed for a long time, but like the old colony of the United States, They are no longer willing to have their situations dictated by another part of the world that really looks down its nose at them. And, this is very hard. If you look at British history, there are still sizable parts of Britain that still haven't come to terms with the fact
Yeah, I
that the
know.
British Empire is a vague memory. We should learn from that because, as the saying goes, if you don't learn from history, you will be condemned to repeat it.
Yeah, that is sad. Now, I understand that. Now, aren't we doing certain things right now that's exacerbating that death or making
Yes.
that death less pleasurable than it should be?
Yes, because that unfortunately is also typical. People who don't understand the situation become increasingly desperate, trying to hold on to what history will not let them keep. That's very classic. You can see it in the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire. They keep trying to hold on. That's half the reason they have a queen. I mean, they try to hold on to the symbols. It's downright funny if you take a step back. Well, here we have here in the United States. Let me give you just of examples so people see it. One of the dominating powers of the British Empire in the 19th and early 20th century was the fact that the British currency, the British pound sterling, was the global money. It was as good as gold. Okay, the symbol of the United States over the last century has been the role of the dollar, which was that. In other words, the dollar pushed the London stock markets and the British pound to a secondary role, and it became the dollar. Well, over the last 20 years, as China has emerged the new economic colossus, the American currency has begun to be less and less the dominant story, and therefore wealthy people, central banks around the country are kind of reducing their holding of dollars as the reserve behind their currency and are beginning to use more and more yuan, the Chinese currency. Okay, so that was underway. Now you get the Ukraine war. And what does a desperate Biden government do? It seizes the property of foreign central banks, above all Russia. It threatens others. It seizes the private property of wealthy people in Russia. The world's wealthy parked their money in the United States. It was like a subsidy of the whole world. Wealthy people took their savings and put them in a bank in New York and invested them in dollars. You know what they're doing now? They're looking at this country and they're saying, uh-oh, it's on the downswing. We're not keeping our money there. We're not investing. Did we own 5 apartments on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan like a piggy bank? Yeah. Well, we're going to sell 3 of them right now, and we're going to buy apartments someplace else. Here's the joke that's making the rounds in Moscow. Those oligarchs, those super rich people in that country. And by the way, one of the signs of desperation is that the people in Russia we call oligarchs, here we call job-creating investors. The same damn thing.
Exactly.
It's just, you're just playing verbal games. Anyway, the joke in Moscow goes like this. The oligarchs used to take all their money and keep it in the West, in the United States above all else. But now they can't. They're afraid it'll be snatched. So they're bringing it all home and investing here in Russia, which is very good for us. In other words, the United States, in its desperate effort to stop this historic shift, is actually accelerating it. The turn away from the dollar is much worse today than it was 2 months ago before the invasion of the Ukraine. I mean, people have to understand, however tragic the experience is for people in Ukraine. I mean, it's always tragic to be on the receiving end of war, but this is a footnote, what's going on there. It's horrible for them, but in the history of the human race, this is a small moment of conflict between a shrinking, desperate empire on the one hand and an emerging empire which has the luxury of looking at itself and saying, time is on our side. But of course, if the United States were to become more desperate, if things get really worse, how tragic might they be? What might they do? Could it set off a nuclear war? I don't see how any human being can say that they know that won't happen. I mean, the last century we had the two world wars. They were the worst wars we've ever seen, and they didn't have nuclear weapons then.
And Professor, what's interesting is that the only country on this planet that we know has used nuclear weapons against other humans, it's us, isn't it?
That's right. Those two bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, absolutely. And the world knows it. And the world, you know, more and more, I read European newspapers every day. It's part of my job. And I can tell you that even in Europe, allied as it is with the United States, you have more and more people beginning to say what you will hear all over Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Leaders there, whether you like them or not, honest ones, corrupt ones, they're all debating. Maybe it's time for us to change horses because it doesn't look like the one we're on is going to win. It looks like that other one that's coming up fast is going to be the winner. Well, the United States has to face this reality, but what I see is a government and mainstream media that are putting their hands in front of their eyes, not willing to see any of it.
Well, you know, Doctor, let me just say this, Dr. Wolff, because it is amazing that you said that. These are some things that I've been thinking about, right? The rest of the world saw that we were willing to elect a Donald Trump and all that he represents as the president. They also saw that in the election of Biden, who is a step above, better than Donald Trump, but at the same time, that Donald Trump got more votes in his second election by quite a few millions that he did in the first. And they have to sit back and think, will the United States put a crazy person back in the White House again? And what does that mean economically for the rest of the world? Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And if you put that together with all of what's going on now, look, I'm not asking for people to be sympathetic with super rich people, but the American economy has depended on the world's super rich looking at the US dollar and the US economy as where they can put their money, where it will be safe, where private property is an absolute value.
Sacrilege,
All of that has been destroyed. First by Mr. Trump, as you rightly put it. Let's remember, Mr. Trump declared economic and trade war against China. He punished the Chinese companies. He hit them with tariffs. He arranged for the arrest of the daughter of a tycoon, a Chinese tycoon in Canada. And he did everything you can imagine. He promised that he would win the trade war. He did not. He promised that what he was doing would change China's basic politics. It's all a failure. And yet it was the biggest package of sanctions the world had ever seen. Mr. Biden has gone him several steps better, done even more against Russia, not against China. But frankly, because of the alliance between Russia and China, which India basically has now joined, the ability of the United States to call the shots is looking to the whole world like a bit of a bluff. And you know, if you bluff and you get caught, it's never the same game when you do. It's a terrible chance you're taking, which is why you get the bizarre hysteria. But yes, you're right. They've seen not only that Mr. Trump was elected, but that the establishment, the rich corporations that run the country, they didn't prevent it. They let him be the president for 4 years. And so the rest of the world has to wonder, exactly as you put it, what kind of, if the Democrats lose this November or 2 years from now, what are they going to see? And they have to make their plans now to protect themselves from what might happen.
You know what
I
is
think,
interesting?
yeah.
Dr. Wolff, Germany apparently saw that they're spending up the gazoo right now in self-protection and other places. You mentioned something that I think bears mentioning. You said earlier, and I think it is so important, that you read every morning, you read newspapers from around the world. And it would be great if not only more Americans did that, but if our mainstream media actually brought that to the fold as well. I mean, if you take a look at the active discussions between certain neoliberal professors in the United States on Indian TV, you would see a discussion that Americans would not, that would actually blow their minds. I mean, I heard an American professor go to India, and he started to chastise India from not simply jumping onto the bandwagon with Ukraine. Right. And when India was done explaining all the destruction that we ourselves have caused, when the Indians were done talking about the financial policies of the United States and how it affected other countries, without most Americans knowing these things, the professor had nothing to say. Because the reality is, we only know what we're told here in the United States and not what our brand of capitalism has done throughout the world. Is that right?
Absolutely. Let me give you another example that makes your point. I mean, I don't mean to repeat it, but I think it'll help people understand it. Last Sunday was a national election in France, an important ally. I want to point out 3 facts, and I won't embarrass anyone watching or listening to this program by asking them whether they were aware of the following facts. Okay. The sitting president, who's been the president of that country for several years, Emmanuel Macron by name, 72% of the French people who went to the polls and voted against him. In other words, the French people, more than 2/3, think he stinks as the leader, and they don't want him. That should have been a remarkable headline because of what it implies about what is the second most important economy in Europe, namely the French. Almost not a word of recognition. Number 2, the election was presented as if the 2 front runners, a right of center president, Macron, and an even further right-wing anti-immigrant a woman named Marine Le Pen, that's it. That's who the French are all excited. In other words, France is way over on the right. Okay, let me give you the information. Marine Le Pen got 23.1% of the vote. Okay, let's be real clear. That's less than 1 out of 4 people in France voted for the extreme right wing. Number 2, there was a third candidate. By the way, the French had a dozen people running because the French, if you don't mind my saying so, believe in freedom of choice. You should have a lot of choice when you go to the polls. We in America seem to be very happy with having basically 2 to choose among, and we all know how hard it is to keep them separate, one from the other. Okay, so let's go back to France. There was a third candidate. His name is Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. My family's French, so I follow these things. Who's Mélenchon? He is a left-wing socialist. He is to the left politically of Bernie Sanders or AOC. Like them, he's a socialist, but he's more left-wing than them. What vote did he get? Remember now, Marine Le Pen got 23.1%. Jean-Luc Mélenchon got 22%.
I heard,
In other words, the very least you ought to know is that the socialist left is virtually in a dead heat with that far right. But I'm not done. One of the political parties running for president was the French Communist Party. Okay, How much did they get? 2.5%. Had the Communist Party unified with Mr. Mélenchon, and those two parties could discuss doing things like this together, and they've done that in the past. Had they gotten together, the combined vote would have been 22 for Mr. Mélenchon, 2.5 for the communists. Together, that would have given them 24.5, and Le Pen would be out of the run. I mean,
right.
What? And America had no idea. Last point. In the run-up to the election, here's an issue that was not a major concern. Ukraine. The big issues were inflation. The big issues were the gap between rich and poor. The big issue was the failure of the president of France to get his program done. Another big issue that he wants to raise the retirement age. In other words, not to let people retire until they're older than the age
and ready
they
to
are
die.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only the left wing, but the right wing in France went after him. And the overwhelming majority of French people agree, not with the president, but with the right and left. You could have had an interesting conversation. France is a couple of hours by train from Ukraine. They have every reason to be interested. They aren't. Why might that be? Why are you could have had interesting debates and discussions. Instead, the Americans are left with a completely caca. I mean, I don't know how to say this politely. Nonsense idea, and this isn't unique to France. It's true from all, the German story. The German story is, here's how it's understood in Europe. When the war in Ukraine breaks out, the Germans, who want to keep a good relationship with Russia because they depend on Russian gas and oil, particularly gas. So they're not going along. Biden sends Blinken over there, and they say, we need you to get on board. The Germans say, what's it worth to you? Answer. We're going to let you rearm. We're going to approve the rearmament of Germany. Let's remember, Germany was World War II. Yeah. Right. Germany was denied an armory after World War I, for which they were blamed, and World War II, for which they were blamed. The United States said, we will support, get ready now, a tripling of your defense budget to give you the biggest army in Europe. Everybody else in Europe is now aware, not that they have a problem with Russia, they knew they had a risk there. They now understand they have a problem much closer, Germany, which is already an economic powerhouse inside of Europe and will now be a dominant military force, which it wasn't before.
Right.
Okay. Here's the irony of ironies for Americans. Why would Germany want that? They're not going to have a war with Russia. They'd probably lose that. They've lost twice trying to take over Russia. I don't think they're going to do it. You know who they're worried about? The United States.
Right.
They want to be freer to figure out which way the wind is blowing, and having an army that the United States has to worry about gives them a bit more wiggle. The ironies here that we will look back on, they should stop everyone dead in their tracks to begin to rethink. Otherwise, if you follow the mainstream media, it's like trying to understand Shakespeare by reading a classic comic book.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's why we do what we do, Professor. Now, let me ask you something. Now, let's get a little bit localized to America here, because there's while what we're talking about has a lot to do with what is ultimately going to occur with the birth, the living, and the death of these economic systems. But in the short term, I've got into several discussions with some people who have a tendency to believe that inflation is divine. And what I've been trying to point out to many is that, how can inflation be divine? How can we have a gas shortage when gasoline shortage when Venezuela is sitting on a pool of oil? And because they don't want the oil to, first of all, let me put it this way. I want to know if you agree with this. My contention is, we're not exploiting Venezuelan oil because the corporations under the current Venezuelan government cannot control it. In other words, the basic tenet behind Venezuela is that the oil resources belong to the people. And I know there's corruption, et cetera, but that was Chavez's main tenet.
Right. Yeah, no, I could not agree more. And I think, I don't mean to be impolite, but the economic literacy in the United States has not been developed. That's as polite as I know how to be. But let me explain. An inflation is a word that simply describes a general rise in the price of pretty much everything. Not everything the same amount.
Right.
Food goes up this amount, and fuel goes up that amount, and rent goes up. But in general, prices are rising. Okay, let's begin the basic economics. Who determines a price? In other words, who raises it if it's
those
going
with
up?
Price and power.
Right. And that's called the employer class.
Right.
Roughly in the United States, 1% of our people are employers. The other 99% aren't. The other 99%, we're the ones who pay the prices, but we don't set them. Even anyone who's listening who ever had a job knows that if you're not the employer, or you're not on the board of directors of the corporation, no one ever asks your opinion about setting the prices of what's produced in the company where you work. A tiny number of people. So if you're not happy with prices going up, the anger or the upset or the question should be directed at the 1% of our people who are in the position to do it. Moreover, we live in a capitalist system which allows them, because they are quote unquote free enterprises, to jack up the price whenever the hell they wish to. All right, second point, and I'm just being an economics teacher here. Why do employers make the decisions they do, including the raising of a price? The answer is that the employer's every action is dictated by what they themselves tell us dictates it, namely to make money. They're in business to profit is their bottom line, they tell us. They are taught in business school, and I've taught in business schools. They are taught every decision you make should be geared towards, will it improve your profitability or will it not? If you raise your profits, your career goes up. If you don't, your career goes into the toilet. Okay, so the honest answer to why employers raise prices is the same answer every kid in business school writes on his or her exam. It's because it's profitable. If you think you can get away by charging more, that's your job to do it. I'll remind you of a famous saying that describes capitalism. The seller always sells at the best price the market will bear. You know what that means? You jack up the price if you can get away with it. So we have an inflation because businesses think they're in a situation where they can get away with raising the price. And in many cases, they're right, but that's why we have it. It's not from God. It's not divine. It's not like a rainfall coming out of nature. And by the way, let me end this by reminding folks of a Republican conservative president named Richard Nixon. On August 15th, 1971, he went on radio and television. He was the president at the time. And he said, we've got a terrible inflation. And here's what I'm going to do. And he declared what came to be known as a wage price freeze.
Control. Yeah.
Okay. And here's what he said. As of tomorrow, he gave the talk in the late afternoon or evening. As of tomorrow morning, if you're a business and if you raise your price, we're going to arrest you and throw you into jail. Because guess what? The inflation stopped on a dime. There is no issue here. There's no big fat complexity. If you were an honest society, you would be debating right now the pros and cons of what they're doing now, which is not stopping the inflation, currently running 8.5%, according to the government release yesterday. Everything you do now, including doing nothing, has all kinds of consequences. But we don't even have a discussion. We don't even have a debate. When I explain to people the history of Mr. Nixon, most of my audience never heard about it. This is new news for them that we've solved the problem. So again, it is this sad bubble of self-imposed ignorance that people like you open up by your work, by your exposing these kinds of things. But it's really tragic for a country with the mounting problems we have to be as childishly narrow in what it thinks about, let alone discusses.
That is why I love to have you, because you really, I think, first of all, given what you do, it ensures that people get exactly what we're talking about here, educated. Now, Professor, we have one last question here, and that is, where do we go from here? I mean, we understand we're in a down spiral, but for those of us who still have to exist as we go down, where do we go from here?
Well, I think we have, at the highest level, we have to come to terms with a basic choice. And I can't tell you whether the Republicans or the Democrats are the better bet to figure this out, to face it, and to deal with it. I don't have much confidence in either of them, so I'm appealing to the average American citizen. I have more confidence in him or her. So here's the question. After the American Revolution in 1776, the British said, let's give it one more trial. And in 1812, we had another war between Britain and the United States. And the British were defeated again. They still didn't accept it because in the Civil War, the British seriously considered siding with the slave South against the North. They didn't do it in the end, but they certainly considered it. Okay, we can have with China war. I mean, I can't imagine it. The risk to the entire population, literally every person alive, is catastrophic. So I'm terrified that they will bumble and fumble their way into a military conflict. And looking at Ukraine, wow, there we have a kind of early installment. Yeah, it's terrible. So the alternative is compromise. Sit down. You're still important here in the United States. You're still a rich country. You're the richest single country in the world. You still have a lot of chips on your side of the table. Sit down, work out a compromise that allows the Chinese to grow and gather into their hands what they have proven they're capable of doing, but that safeguards the world and that gets the world in. Look, those were the ideas behind the League of Nations. That was the idea behind the United Nations. We were supposed to create institutions that would never again risk the kind of horrible wars that made the 20th century so tragic. We either learn to do that, we either get politicians that are prepared to do that, or we are taking a risk that will make you and me and everybody alive today face an indefinite future of well-deserved anxiety.
Dr. Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics, Emeritus, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. And folks, don't forget to get The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Thank you so kindly, Professor, for having been on Politics Done Right.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for producing these programs on an ongoing basis. It's one of the most important public services anyone could do.
Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you guys for watching that. Now, this is important. I don't let misinformation go unchallenged on this program. And Daniel Ledo put out 3 pieces of poor misinformation. First, just to give my bona fides, just because I'm going to talk about something technical, I am a mechanical engineer who had to take heavy physics and did a lot in physics. An atomic bomb is a nuclear bomb, and an atomic bomb today is no different than an atomic bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They all operate by using uranium or plutonium. One was a uranium bomb, one was a plutonium bomb. You send neutrons through the nucleus and bust it open. The reason nuclear bombs today yield a lot more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki is because those were when the technology just came out. They weren't as efficient in splitting the atom to maximize the amount of energy that was released from splitting the atom. As time went on, our fission bomb, by the way, there's nuclear fission, which is what's used to create the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and most of our supply, it's nuclear fission bombs, okay? Now, that is to split the atom. There is another type of atomic bomb as well, known as the nuclear bomb, known as the fusion bomb. And the way that operates is it uses a fission bomb to go ahead and compress hydrogen. It has to use a lighter chemical, a lighter element, into converting that hydrogen into helium, and in the process releases even more energy than it does when the atom is split. They are all nuclear bombs. They're either used by splitting the atom or fusing the atom. And that bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were both fission nuclear bombs. Yes, they were nuclear bombs, also known as atomic bombs. The only reason they use the word atomic is that it's working on the atom level. Now, the difference between energy from an atom and a chemical reaction is a chemical reaction only works with the electrons. So when you mix chemicals that create heat or whatever, or you burn wood, it's also a release of energy, but it's only happening on the electron level. When you release nuclear power, it happens on the nucleus level. That's why it's called nuclear, atomic nuclear. So that is the actual scientific answer. Daniel Ledo does not know what he is speaking about at all. When it comes to the Constitution and calling black people a 3/5 of a person, the right wing, because of their racism, would like you to believe like, oh, it was just a compromise. It didn't really call black people 3/5 of a person. If you are only counted in a Democrat, if you're only counted for democratic principles as 3/5 of a vote to count your state's representation in Congress, that means that black folk were considered 3/5 of a person, period. There's no argument about it. You can read the Constitution yourself. You can read the amendment that reversed the 3/5 the 3/5 amendment. Okay, you can read it. You can read what part of the Constitution that amendment removed. I don't remember if it's a 14th. I don't remember what number amendment does it. So yes, black people were considered, for counting purposes, 3/5 of a person. And lastly, the 40 acres and a mule. You will not find anywhere in anything that I've spoken about that says 3/5 and a mule were in the Constitution. I could not have said that when the Constitution was written in 1789, I believe, and the Civil War was in 1862, 63, somewhere around there. It makes no sense that I would have said that, but in fact, I think it was General Sherman, I believe, had a decree that promised the released slaves from the South 40 acres and a mule. He didn't have the authorization, though, in Congress to assign that, so he used, I believe, something like 400,000 acres or some amount of acres from the land that he was recovering from the southern states, and that was supposed to be delegated to the slaves. They never got the mule, and some of them, I think of that 400,000 acres, like 40,000 acres or something like that was distributed. The reason I'm pointing these things out is this is how the right wing operates. They lie, they misinform, and then they repeat. Lie, misinform, repeat. Daniel Ledo, my good friend, my brother, comes here and he lies to you on 3 specific issues. And had that not been answered, you would go home thinking, oh, wait a minute, you mean an atomic bomb is not a nuclear bomb and it's something nice the United States did to Japan? No, the United States is the only country that has ever had the nerve to use an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb. Not 1, but 2. 1 in Hiroshima, 1 in Nagasaki. We must atone for these things. We must atone. If the Russians use the atomic bomb against somebody they consider an enemy, we can go ahead and scream and shout and do whatever we want. But do remember that reality. The same things that the Russians are doing, and I have a piece in that I wanted to play, but I don't have enough time. But the same thing the Russians are doing in Ukraine, we have done elsewhere. I am from Panama, Central America. The United States didn't like that Noriega told them no when they wanted to, I think it was invade either El Salvador or Nicaragua. And he said, no, I'm not sending no troops over there. And they always knew that he was laundering money. He's a capitalist. He launders money. He's a capitalist. He was going to go ahead and bring that money. I mean, he helps the drug dealers launder their money that brings drugs to the United States. Well, the United States love their drugs. They love their drugs. We love our drugs. So he's a capitalist. Where there's a need, he met the demand. So we went into Panama and we bombed the holy hell out of Colón, Panama City, and David. 10,000 Panamanians got killed. The Americans confessed to only 1,000. The UN confessed to 4,000. We know where it happened in Colón, Marañón, and David. Not Marañón, Chorrera and David. We know how many people lived there. That's how many people died. 10,000 Panamanians died. Went for the invasion to get Manuel Antonio Noriega to show him a lesson. That's what we did. Okay, when I remember during the Iraq War, we were watching on TV. It actually looked like a game. It actually, people were just there watching all those bombs flying, and you could see the tracers and the colors and all of that dropping on people, not just military equipment. And my wife and I sat down and watched Desert Storm when Baghdad was getting creamed with all these missiles and bombs and everything else. And I said, everybody's watching that and saying something like, wow, the United States finally is going to take out Saddam Hussein. And my first thought was, my God, all those people whose bodies were in pieces from those bombs that we dropped because, right? We have this Arab country invading another Arab country. Both of them don't care about their people. They treat women like crap and whatever. But we're going to go in there and do those things, right? And in America, we complain about the propaganda in Russia right now, and they are not being able to watch TV. We're saying that, right? It's true. Guess what? Did you remember seeing on TV in the United States broken bones and obliterated bodies that you're seeing from Ukraine right now? I don't think we saw the mutilated bodies and so forth that they kind of help. They don't show it as much here, even for Ukraine. But we are seeing a lot more here of Ukraine than we saw of Iraq, than we saw of Bosnia-Herzegovina. We didn't see that. So all countries, right? I'm for humanity. I am for people. I love humanity. But when it comes to war and what countries do and how they control for power, it's a different story, sir. It's a different story. And when you understand what we were seeing in what the people in Colombia, what the people in Panama, and all these other countries, when they saw the blood, guts, and bones that were blown up, that we blew up. Okay? So be measured. Be humble. Start thinking. We need to start thinking and atone. We need to start being able to understand war is a terrible thing. Right and wrong, when it comes to countries, it's a very dubious thing. Because I tell you what, somebody's freedom fighter is the other person's terrorist. Right? I mean, right now, how do you think those people in America who were destroyed by, were we a terrorist country back in 1865? Were we a terrorist country during the hangings and the lynchings in America? Let's be humble. Let's be humble. Let's atone. Let's not go around thinking that we are so much better than everybody else, that we don't do certain things. The same way the Russians are in Russia confused, thinking that they're not in a war or thinking that they're in a just war, is how Americans feel, even though at times we go out and we do very, very bad things. I am sorry, I saw your messages, folks. I'm not forgetting to, but today Daniel Ledo opened the door that I wanted to close, because I don't want, when you come here, I want everybody to be informed. And I want everybody to go into things with open arms. When people want just war and think that the rest of the world knows what we do and we know what the rest of the world does, it's important. Anyhow, let me go ahead and ask you folks to please consider supporting the program.
Dr. Willis, as host of Politics Done Right, a progressive radio media show on Pacifica Network's KPFT 90.1 FM Houston that engages all ideologies, I found that our political angst isn't mostly ideological. There is a well-designed effort by many in power to control us. If we are at each other's throats, we are less likely to demand our economic and local wishes. In that light, I wrote 3 books. I wrote the first one titled, As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, to describe the entire economy in a manner we can all understand. It highlights why it was designed to pilfer most as it empowers a few, the chosen. The second book, titled, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, take it to the next level. After understanding how the system pilfers, it is incumbent that we can speak to our peers to empower a change. The third book, How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, gives us a place to land. After learning about our economy that is dysfunctional for most and learning how to engage the other side, we point out what would make an economy that works for all. Each book stands on its own, but together they provide the full picture. Please consider getting one or more. You will undoubtedly learn, be entertained, and help us continue the mission with our blogs, articles, videos, and books. I'm Egberto Willis, as host of Politics Done Right, a progressive radio media show on Pacifica Network's KPFT 90.1 FM Houston that engages all...
Oops! I'm clicking, and I couldn't get it to work. Anyhow, folks, please support us. Please consider going to our YouTube channel, politicsandright.com/YouTube, politicsandright.com/YouTube, or just click on that join button if you're already on YouTube. You can also support us at Patreon, politicsandright.com/Patreon. Patreon is spelled Patreon, Patreon, or the best way, again, politicsandright.com/PayPal. politicsandright.com/PayPal. PayPal, you know how to spell that. The all-encompassing place to support us is at politicsandright.com/support. politicsandright.com/support. Please visit our store. Our store has a whole lot of new good stuff, t-shirts, hoodies, all of that with the Politics and Right logo, etc. That is how you can really help us take this message out and not have Americans completely fooled. You heard what Dr. Richard Wolff talked about, willful ignorance, and us just and he talked about the childish nature of our belief in the system as opposed to what's best for us all. Great interview. You can check it out. I've released it so everybody has full access to his interview all by itself. So please support us at politicsandright.com/store and get the books. Please get the books. We speak a lot about these issues in the books. politicsandright.com/books. politicsandright.com/books. Before I leave, I'm going to go another minute over because I want to salute all those that came in after the thing started. Bridge MCP, welcome aboard. Carl Cox, welcome aboard. Paul Fleming, welcome aboard. Eric Hayes, welcome aboard. Roberto Lumis, mi hermano panameño, welcome aboard. E2247, Carl Cox. And I'm going to Squeedo, Tom C. How you doing, Tom? Welcome aboard. Who else is here? Rudnin, I got Rudnin already. May Wood, how you doing, May? Fleming Sr., how you doing, sir? BG, welcome aboard. Who else have we got here? And then we'll exit, but I want to make sure and call out all our peeps, including those that I didn't get because we started the program. Let's see, if I missed you, just drop your name. Daniel Ledo, welcome again, but I spoke about you a whole lot already, so you're there. West, welcome aboard. And I think I got everybody else that I didn't. If I missed you, throw your name in the bottom. I'm going to do one last scroll to the bottom before I exit the program today. AVQ says bye-bye. Bye-bye, AVQ. Thank you. So there's a whole lot of message left unread. Yes, I know. It was one of those programs. But guys, I love you. Thank you so kindly for having been here. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and you guys know how I end this. I am what? Out!
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.